What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we're going to turn the page to redraft season, and what better way to do that than talk about 6 of the very best picks in fantasy football right now. I've done about 60 drafts at this point. A lot of them have been on the channel. I stream every Monday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern time, and these are just 6 players that stand out as grossly mispriced. It's early in the season right now. ADPs haven't really shaken out fully at this point. We're going to get summer hype trains, and these are 6 players I think are just mispriced by a round, multiple rounds. Guys I cannot stop drafting in fantasy football. So with all that being said, we're going to talk about all of those guys in depth. As always, if you enjoy, make sure down below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
VVS stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen. She gon' let me.
Now, first up here, we are going to talk about Jaylen Waddle. Now, I will say, these players, we have 6 players. I think we're going to have like 2 in the early rounds, 2 in the middle rounds, 2 in the late rounds to kind of give you a full spectrum of the board right now. And first up, we have Jaylen Waddle. He is going at the 209 on Underdog, or I believe 20.4 is now 208. So he actually keeps climbing at this point. He's going as the wide receiver 15. I've drafted him on 20% of my teams. Now, the average rate is 1 divided by 12, which is, I want to say, like 8.6%. So I'm drafting a lot of Jaylen Waddle. 20% is about like 12% over expectation. That's a lot. I'm taking him 1 out of every 5 drafts right now on Underdog, which, by the way, they are the biggest partner of this channel. You can see the sign behind me. They are the best. Underdog Fantasy. Make sure you check them out. I have a link in the description and the comment section down below. If you click the link, it'll take you to Underdog Fantasy. It'll use promo code RON, and my promo code RON will match your first deposit up to $250. It'll match half of your first deposit. So if you deposit $100, they'll match $50. You deposit $25, they'll match $12.50. So you guys get what's going on here. They have drafts going on all summer. Right now they have like $3 drafts, $3 to win $10,000. It's like the mini Schnauzer. Really cool contest. It's like 15-second clocks, which is nice. So these drafts go by in like less than a half an hour. Really nice way to get in there, get your feet wet, see what these draft rooms are looking like, and practice for your home leagues. Now let's talk about Jaylen Waddle here. All right, he is a weird one because if you drafted him last year, you likely did not have a good time, and I completely understand feeling a bit stung by Jaylen Waddle. Tyreek Hill is a number 1 there, so it never feels good taking a number 2 wide receiver in an offense, but I can't quit him this year. Now, like I said, he let you down last year. He was the wide receiver 21 in points per game. It was actually his worst year of his career, despite his highest price tag of a second-round pick. And now we fast forward to this year, and we get no discount on him failing last year, and you're now paying, again, a second-round pick. So why am I fine taking that stab? And part of it is that the second round of drafts right now is absolutely brutal. There's this tier break where I kind of want to break this down in a future video, but the second round is brutal. You get to like Puka, Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and it just falls off a cliff. You're talking like Drake London, Marvin Harrison Jr. This is a dynasty channel. We love Marvin Harrison Jr., but man, 201 is by far the most expensive rookie wide receiver we've ever had to pay a price on. Drake London doesn't have a single like top 12 finish, and we're drafting him as the 202. Jonathan Taylor's fine, and then you have like Olave and Ayuk, and Saquon is a little bit older. All of these guys have question marks, so in a sea of questionable picks, I'm fine taking a stab on someone that seems questionable on the surface in Jaylen Waddle, but to me has a lot of upside here, especially in best ball on Underdog. Now, when we talk about Jaylen Waddle in his year last year, you need the context of he had a billion injuries, right? You see here, and it's just after he did not miss a single game over his first 2 years, which is pretty crazy for a guy that came into the NFL with a little bit of injury concerns. He had like 1 or 2 incomplete seasons at Alabama when he was there. But you look here, we have, and none of them are even related. That's the crazy part too. It's not even like it was like a hamstring that nagged him the entire time. We're talking concussion, then back soreness, then knee soreness, then bruised chest, then high ankle sprain. None of them correlated, and a lot of them, despite only 3 games missed across the board, a lot of it was leaving games early or playing banged up, and he could just never really get into a groove and give you fantasy production. But when we talk about what he did in the games that he did play, or just the routes that he did run, he was amazing on a per route basis last year. And this is next to Tyreek Hill. He was still a monster. This is him in PFF receiving grade, so that's just based on film. What does this player look like to the PFF grading guys? And if you don't trust those, We have first downs per out run, which we learned from Ryan Heath is a really good stat because it's, are you an engine in this offense? When you run routes, are you moving the chains, right? There's a difference between like big plays and broken plays versus grinding out first downs and moving the chains and making your offense drive down the field. Targets per out run, that's easy. Just how much volume are you commanding on a per out basis? And then yards per out run, how efficient are you? And even last year, in what was a pretty much, like we just showed, the worst fantasy football season of Jaylen Waddle's career, 5th in PFF receiving grade, 7th in first downs per out run, 6th in targets per out run, 7th in yards per out run. That's amazing. That's top 7 numbers across the board for a guy next to Tyreek Hill and for a guy that was banged up the entire time. Now, when we talk about Jaylen Waddle heading into this year, again, he was good last year on a per out basis. The injury stuff was fluky, and I'm always going to bet on a Mike McDaniel offense. He's been here the last 2 years, and over that span has been 6 in EPA per play, which is just an efficiency on a per play basis, right? 49ers, Bills, Chiefs, Eagles, Cowboys ahead of them, all elite offenses. And last year, he was second in points scored, or the Dolphins were second in points scored, Mike McDaniel as well. This is a really good offense. It's consolidated, right? You have Waddle, you have Tyreek, you have the running backs. There's not any of these. Like Braxton Berrios wasn't in the mix last year. They very rarely spread it super thin. They give it to their playmakers, and Waddle is one of those. Now, I also like, especially in best ball, and just honestly across the board when we're talking about week-winning players, Jaylen Waddle is that. Now, this isn't really meant to bash Olave in any sense of the word. It's just to show next to another guy going in the second round, Chris Olave, who's more expensive than him, someone that seems to have, it's not as polarizing. Like Chris Olave seems like a safe second-round pick, but when you look at kind of the distribution of their points, half PPR points on a per-game basis, which is shown here by Hidden Winks, and just kind of showing what his ceiling is, right? We've seen Jaylen Waddle have almost like a 35-point half PPR game, and we've never seen Olave even really past 25. Waddle has some crazy upside where he's hit 20+, 25+, 30+ multiple times, so he's giving you massive spike weeks. He's in a good offense. He's great on a per-out basis. Again, when we talked about what he did on a per-out basis, 27% targets per out run is no joke. That was more than Justin Jefferson last year. That was right next to Amon-Ra St. Brown, and again, next to Tyreek Hill in that same offense. So he's still commanding like a wide receiver one's target volume type of share on a per-out basis. So he has spike weeks. He can still command targets next to Tyreek Hill. He's in a good offense. All reasons to bet on him. And then the cherry on top, this is a little bit of backwards math, but there's some contingency upside. There's very few true handcuff wide receivers in the NFL. To me, Jaylen Waddle is one of them. Now, we're talking about a one-game sample, but in the one game in Jaylen Waddle's career that Tyreek Hill did not play, he had 8 catches, 142 yards, a touchdown, and 28.2 PPR points. Now, would he be a 28-point-per-game guy? No, nobody is. But could he go from fringy wide receiver one to like a top 5 wide receiver in any given week that Tyreek Hill goes down? I think that would be the case, just what we've seen on a per-route basis and what he's done without Tyreek Hill in these games. So in the second round, that's pretty ugly. Jaylen Waddle is a really comfortable pick that I make all the time. Now, another comfortable pick that I make, and someone to me where I talked about it earlier, guys that are mispriced by a couple rounds, Jaylen Waddle is probably fine in that middle of the second. I will say, if the market told me tomorrow and I was just like Men in Black flashed, and you told me he was the 201, I'd probably be fine taking him around there with like Marvin Harrison Jr. and Drake London as well. It's like a mid to early second. So if he moved up, I wouldn't be out on him. But right now is like this late second round pick. I'm taking a lot of Jaylen Waddle. I'm also taking a lot of Travis Etienne. I've drafted 17% of him so far. Again, 8% is about the expectation. So about double of what the expectation is. So I think that's about 1 in every 6 drafts. I'm taking Travis Etienne. He's going right now at the 408 as the RB10 in fantasy drafts. And the funny part is like RB10 to me isn't egregious. It's the 408 where he's getting drafted. He's getting punished for last year for some reason. And it just feels too easy. In a world where we're drafting Kyron Williams and Saquon at the 2-3 turn, getting Travis Etienne at the 4-5 turn, especially when the wide receiver avalanche kind of ends, I love that spot because you go from like Cooper Kupp to Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, T. Higgins, and to me there's this big tier break down to like Amari Cooper, George Pickens, who are fine, but in the late 4th, I hate all those picks. So Etienne to me is like right when wide receiver dries up, and I'm taking a lot of Etienne right in that range. Now, why do I like Etienne? First of all, drafting must be now. I kind of hate this like bro math and bro science of it, but you're drafting the RB7 in points per game from last year at RB10, so that's already a good thing. And then on top of that, like Etienne was good last year, despite a pretty bad year efficiency wise. Where when we look at playoff percentage, now this is an underdog, so every 2 out of 12 teams make the playoffs. That is about 16% expectation. I think it's like 16.7%, something in that range. He had a 27.9% playoff rate. And when we look at players drafted or running backs drafted in the top 4 rounds last year, after McCaffrey, it was Etienne. He had a higher advance rate than Derrick Henry, a higher advance rate than Breece Hall. Travis Etienne was a monster last year. Now, he did slow down in the playoffs, and that's maybe why his championship odds weren't that great. But in terms of getting your team forward and being a home run of a pick, he was a wagon for you during the regular season, which to me makes it curious that he's now getting dinged heading into next year, if that makes sense. Again, RB7 in points per game, second best advance rate behind McCaffrey, and he's cheaper than he was last year, which is like, it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Now, with Etienne, I will say, this is kind of the weird part of the dichotomy with Etienne. His efficiency was brutal, 3.8 yards per carry after a 5.1 yards per carry. You can see that with this bottom chart here, but he had 12 touchdowns. So that kind of offset, right? He had bad yards per carry, explosive run percentage, but he scored a lot of touchdowns, which kind of offset each other. But we could see both of those return back to the mean, or maybe his touchdown scoring goes back to where it should be, and his yards per carry goes back to where we know it can be, because he succeeded last year despite one of the worst environments possible for a running back. You can see here, this is from Ben Baldwin on Twitter. It takes PFF run blocking grades into account, and then ESPN run blocking win rates into account. And the Jaguars next to the Giants had by far the worst offensive line, which comes into play when you look at my tweet here. 2023 yards before contact per attempt, he was 40th. He had just 1.15 yards before contact per attempt. Now, just across the board, that affected his efficiency, right? He was 36 in yards per carry. He was 37th in rushing yards over expected per attempt. Just on a per carry basis, what are you expected? What are you getting above or below that? His explosive run percentage was 31st. And then the offense itself, 19th in EPA per play, which is offensive efficiency per play. Now, before that, the first year that Doug Peterson came in, and the first year Travis Etienne was the lead back in this offense, you had 6th in yards per carry, 3rd in rushing yards over expected per attempt, 8th in explosive run percentage, 2nd in yards before contact per attempt, and they didn't even have necessarily a great offensive line. It just wasn't league worst at that point, and then 8th in EPA per play. So this was a down year across the board for this offense. Travis Etienne struggled. Trevor Lawrence struggled. We could see here, this is adjusted EPA per play. So just per play efficiency for quarterbacks here. And when you adjust for pass protection, receiver drops, dropped interceptions, luck on interceptable passes, fumble recoveries, interceptions, all of this is from Kevin Cole. You can see Trevor Lawrence gets a 0.19 increase up to 0.26. So I believe that means that he was a 0.07 EPA per play guy. But when you adjust for all of that luck stuff and environment, those variables, he gets bumped up between Dak Prescott and Josh Allen. So this entire offense just had a down year, brutal offensive line, brutal interception and wide receiver dropping luck. And I just don't – we've seen Doug Peterson have good offenses in the past. The Jaguars, to me, are one of the best bets to bounce back here. So Etienne was already the RB7 in points per game on poor efficiency. If the entire offense can bounce back and we see a better offensive line, we see a better Trevor Lawrence, right? They draft Brian Thomas Jr. They get Gabe Davis in there. We're going to have Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram healthy this year. And the offensive line should be improved. Now, again, the Jaguars, when they were second in yards before contact per attempt, when Travis Etienne was in 2022, it wasn't because the Jaguars had the best offensive line in the league. It's just because they had a fine offensive line, which seems to be the case heading into this year. This is a little blurb from Establish the Run. Shout out Brandon Thorne over there. They ranked the Jaguars 21st. Actually, I was going to read it, but I'm not going to. 21st is fine. Like, that's right around league average, and that's all we're asking for. Travis Etienne does not need to have the best offensive line in the league to succeed. Just give us league average. It just can't be the worst next to the Giants. That was the biggest issue last year. So I think that we're going to see offensive line revert back to the mean. We're going to see this offense go from 19, 20 area back to maybe the top 10 like they were in 2022. We can see Trevor Lawrence bounce back, more goal line opportunities, more efficiency for Travis Etienne. And I also think his volume should stay the same. They have nothing behind him. Tank Bigsby was awful. I've seen cut-ups. You can find him on Twitter. I think Ian Harditz had a good one. Tank Bigsby had 4 targets last year, and like 2 of them were interceptions, and another one was like a fumble. He was brutal last year. And then the only other guys that they brought in were Diontae Johnson, and then they drafted Kellen Robinson. All just guys in the NFL. Travis Etienne had the 6th most receptions last year, the 4th most carries last year, and I don't see that kind of volume changing with this being the backfield behind him. This is a quote tweet from Jacob Sanderson on Graham Barfield. Graham Barfield said, Tank Bigsby struggled with drops at OTAs. The Jaguars beat reporter has already been talking about how bad Tank Bigsby was at OTAs. And then Jacob Sanderson said by week 6, Diontae Johnson will be the RB2, Kalen Robinson RB3 and kick returner, and Tank Bigsby will be inactive. I don't know if I believe that all the way, but it just goes to show that is a possibility because of how bad the running backs behind him are. So, again, volume should stay the same. Efficiency should go up. The touchdowns were fluky, but with the offense bouncing back and a lack of goal line options, right? There's no goal line hammer Mike Talbert type in this backfield. So he's still going to have all the goal line opportunities. He's still going to have all the receptions. He's still going to have all the rushes. The efficiency could bounce back. The touchdowns could bounce back. And for me, that's a smash of a 4th-round pick in fantasy football. Now, the third player we'll talk about is Rome Odunze. Now, you guys know, if you watch the channel, he was my wide receiver 3 in Dynasty. I had him as a clear tier below Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors. I maybe 1 share in Dynasty. I'm not the biggest Rome Odunze guy in the world, and yet he's my most drafted player on Underdog right now. He is going as the 606 as the wide receiver 38. And I just think that that's a monster value. This is an environment right now. We looked at it earlier where Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, don't get me wrong. Again, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is the second coming. He is going to be really, really good in the NFL, but he's going at the 201 as the most expensive rookie wide receiver ever. The second most expensive rookie wide receiver ever, Malik Neighbors, who I also think is amazing, but he's going in the early 3rd. Now, Rome Odunze, not quite my cup of tea, but I've been wrong on wide receiver evals in the past. Everybody has. Is someone that the NFL and a lot of guys I respect saw in the same tier as Neighbors, as Marvin Harrison Jr. And with these rookie wide receivers, a lot of the time it's a talent bet, right? We've seen Jalen Reagor go into a empty Eagles wide receiver room. We've seen Quentin Johnston last year. There was no Mike Williams or Keenan Allen down the stretch. He was the only wide receiver out there, and it still meant nothing. You need the talent to win out. Where Jamar Chase had T. Higgins. Justin Jefferson had Adam Thielen when Adam Thielen was in his prime. You also had last year Puka Nacua next to Cooper Kupp. If you got it, you got it, which is why with rookie wide receivers, I'm willing to just bet on the talent. And when you look at Rome Odunze, if he is as good as these film guys think, he's going to hit right away. Where this is a blurb from Matt Harmon. We've had him on the channel. He's amazing. Reception perception. Check him out. All green, success by route tree on reception perception, which is amazing. Route running savant, which to me, that's a really translatable skill. You know, the minute he gets on the field in the NFL, he's going to be cooking guys, especially with DJ Moore out there, with Keenan Allen out there, already demanding top corners. On top of that, you have Matt Harmon waxing poetic about Rome Odunze. He said, I don't often like to compare prospects to one of the top wideouts to play the game in recent seasons, but I'm breaking the rule for Rome Odunze. He reminds me of Devontae Adams. Odunze is a complete player who has no weaknesses in his game. He's a high-end separator who consistently breaks the first tackle and is a menace in tight coverage. He can win from any alignment, but brings every skill you want from a 28 to 30% target share X-wide receiver. Those players are rare, and Odunze has the potential to join that group. Odunze will get an extremely high classification from me. Over on the stacked prospect rankings, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jamar Chase, and Rome Odunze are the top 3 prospects I have charted for reception perception between the 2021 and 2024 classes. By the time I'm ready to settle the rankings, he very well may end up the top prospect on the board. So we're talking about a guy that wide receiver expert Matt Harmon has in the same breath as Jamar Chase and Marvin Harrison Jr. To me, that holds a lot of weight, right? And I get the situation's not great. Rookie quarterback, crowded wide receiver room, but again, these are oftentimes bets on talent, right? Where Malik Neighbors, again, he's an early 3rd wide receiver that I'm drafting, but Daniel Jones is not the best quarterback in the world. It's not going to be a high-scoring offense. It's going to be a lot of junk volume, but you're drafting him because he's Malik Neighbors and he's a very talented wide receiver, and that's why I'm drafting Rome Odunze. Again, it's not for the early season production or to get on the field right away. It's what he can be down the stretch if his talent is truly what these guys think. And again, if he is this good of a route runner and that good of a jump ball guy and can be the next Davante Adams, it should be there right away, just given the complete prospect he was coming out to these route running guys. And this is a chart that I have drilled into your guys' head at this point. But we draft rookie wide receivers what they can do on the back half of the season. Odunze is probably going to be wide receiver 3 in this offense starting out, but the route percentage can climb. He can get more routes. He can get on the field. He can kind of establish himself in this offense. And by the end of the year, he can be starting wide receiver in this offense, like a Rashee Rice last year, like a Christian Watson before that, like an Amon-Ra St. Brown before that, where these guys work their way up the depth chart, are just undeniable talents. And then all of a sudden, from weeks 12 on, they're a top 5 wide receiver in points per game heading into the fantasy football playoffs. And that's a massive, massive deal when we're talking about middle round wide receivers. Now, this chart, just to go into the sort of detail here, you can see it's just that veterans, as the season goes on, they wear down and their points per game declines. Rookies go up because if they have efficiency, they get more routes, they get on the field, and then their points per game just keeps on going up. And that's something that can happen with Odunze. Now, yes, DJ Moore's in this wide receiver room. Keenan Allen's in this wide receiver room. People are very scared that Odunze is the next JSN, someone that's going to get crowded out of this wide receiver room. You have Shane Waldron coming over from Seattle, coming to the Bears, and he did the same to JSN. Well, what I would say to that is JSN and Odunze are 2 very, very different wide receivers. These are from 2023. Odunze is obviously in college. ADOT. JSN, 6.4 yard ADOT, 69% of his routes came out of the slot. Keenan Allen, 9.9 ADOT, 59% of his snaps came out of the slot. Odunze, 15.5 yard ADOT, 17.4% slot. That's the one that's playing on the outside a lot more, playing a lot more downfield. When we talk about between Keenan Allen and Odunze, who looks more like they would fill the JSN role in this offense in Chicago, it would be Keenan Allen. I talked with Matt Harmon. He didn't call me crazy when I said there's a possibility that Keenan Allen, a guy who has played 23 of 34 possible games last year, could become kind of this late career Larry Fitzgerald slot specialist, where still this is a 3 wide receiver league, right? So Keenan Allen can be the 3rd wide receiver, run about 80% of the routes there, and just be the slot-only guy to kind of preserve his health, preserve his gas tank. He doesn't have any threat down the field in 2 wide receiver sets, and you can have Odunze on the perimeter with DJ Moore. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to be their week 1 starting wide receiver rotation, but if Keenan Allen gets banged up or he tweaks a hamstring or he's just not that good anymore, right? He's now heading into like season 12. He's past the age apex that we see for wide receivers. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but there's outs for it to happen. Or if he gets banged up, he's not as good as he previously was. If Odunze is just an undeniable talent, if this guy comes into the league, top 10 pick, the way that Matt Harmon sees him and a lot of these other wide receiver gurus see him, he can come out there and just be undeniable to the point where they just can't keep him off the field, and all of a sudden he could be a fantasy monster. Now, I know that they have a rookie quarterback, which often doesn't lead to fantasy success, but Caleb Williams is someone that can attack from the pocket, and we've seen before in the past, some of these rookie quarterbacks are just special. Caleb Williams, one of these guys that looks like an Andrew Luck, looks like a Trevor Lawrence, looks like one of these best quarterback prospects ever, coming into pretty much the best landing spot I've ever seen for a rookie quarterback with, again, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Odunze, a pretty good offensive line, Shane Waldron, who's not a bad offense coordinator at all. It's a great setup here. And in the 6th round, again, in a wide receiver market, a rookie wide receiver market right now that's making you pay 5th round prices for Xavier Worthy, 201 prices for Marvin Harrison Jr. Middle of the 6th round for Odunze, to me, feels like a steal, just knowing his talent and knowing how rookie wide receivers have won in the past, where it's never been a depth chart thing. It's almost always been a talent thing. I will bet on Odunze. Now, after that, we have our 4th player here, and that is Diontae Johnson. Now, he is my 2nd highest drafted wide receiver. He's tied with Jaylen Waddle at 20% here. And this one's not all that complicated. Diontae Johnson was like a 4th round pick last year. He obviously didn't pay off, but now we're paying, again, 7th round prices here for Diontae Johnson. And for me, that's just fine. Now, I know that the offense isn't great, but I do find myself trusting Dave Canales to get something out of Bryce Young, right? I'm not the biggest Bryce Young guy in the world, but I do think Canales can get out of Bryce Young, something similar that we saw from Baker Mayfield, right? Where Baker's never going to win an MVP or be a franchise quarterback, but he was great last year and led the Bucs through the playoffs and was fine for fantasy football. And I think that that's in Bryce Young's range of outcomes, where this is a great tweet from Ryan Heath here. You can see just kind of what quarterbacks looked like before and after Dave Canales came in. You can see Geno Smith went from a 4.65 adjusted net yards per attempt to 6.54. Baker Mayfield 4.8 to 6.5. Bryce Young 3.7 to who knows. Bryce Young is probably going to see a step forward in that department. Dave Canales is actually a really good play caller, and that should be exciting. Now, in this tweet, it kind of shows what adjusted net yards per attempt is in the second tweet here. It's just a passing efficiency metric that is pretty good and pretty sticky. So this offense just take a step forward. Bryce Young should be serviceable. And I think at the top of what this offense wants to be in the passing game will be Diontae Johnson. Again, Bryce Young is this guy. He is not a contested catch, air it out, kind of what we saw with Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans last year. He is much more of an anticipation thrower, fitting things, getting guys to create separation, throwing as he's breaking out of the route, and just kind of not dinking and diming, but he's more of a surgeon than a gunslinger. It's kind of how I would say with Bryce Young, which to me, that makes a lot of sense for Diontae Johnson's game, someone who gets open and commands targets. That's really all what I'm looking for, especially in these middle rounds, like a Diontae Johnson. He crushed reception perception last year, greens across the board, and since he's been in the league, he's been one of the best route runners in the NFL. This is ESPN's wide receiver tracking, where they have an open score, and this is since Diontae Johnson was drafted in 2019. Now, to me, the top 5 passes the smell test, right? You have Devontae Adams, A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, 4 of the best route runners in the NFL. Diontae Johnson is the only one above 90 and has a 7-point gap to Devontae Adams. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say he's better than Devontae Adams at route running, but he's a very, very good route runner. And some of the hesitation with Diontae Johnson in the past has been catching touchdowns. I think he dispelled that last year where he caught 5 or 6 last year in what was a really brutal offense. I'll just double check that real quick. But he also, 5 touchdowns in a brutal offense last year, but he also went from a guy, he was seen as a guy who couldn't catch touchdowns, dropped a lot of passes, and then also was this low ADOT possession receiver, kind of like a Jacoby Myers. But he showed last year that he's a little bit more than that, where he had career highs in both yards per route run, so 1.97 yards per route run is pretty damn good, and then 12.7 ADOT. So he's actually downfield, good yards per route run. He's operating on the outside, and he had a career, over his entire career, 24.3% targets per route run, would have been 15th last year. He gets open, he commands targets at a high level, and he's been adding efficiency recently, again, with that ADOT and with that yards per route run. And I like him in this little spot here, where there's 2 spots to me, where there's massive tier breaks on wide receiver, and maybe I'll talk about it eventually. I'll probably do a wide receiver rankings video eventually, but this area where you get from Diontae to Christian Watson, Keon Coleman, JSN, where the red line is, Jameson Williams does not feel good here. This is when we start getting into the running back, green zone, I would call it, where we're talking Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, who else is kind of in this range? If Zamir White's your cup of tea, Raheem Mostert, James Conner, Trey Benson, Tony Pollard. If you like Zamir White, if that's your guy, I think I might have said Zamir White. Zach Moss, if that's your guy. I mean, that is where you're drafting those guys. And to me, it's just a massive tier break. Jameson Williams is fine, but he's not 5 picks worse than JSN. Sutton and Lockett, I'm actually kind of fine within this range, but I don't love Curtis Samuel. And then to me, Romeo Doubs, Rashid Shaheed, Josh Palmer, Khalil Shakur, some of the worst picks on the board, just given what's available around those pick 100. So I like him where if I have 2 or 3 wide receivers, he's the perfect get him and then switch my focus to running back, to a mid-round tight end, or to a mid-round quarterback, which we'll talk about here. Not a mid-round quarterback, but maybe more like a late-round quarterback, and that is Justin Herbert. I am drafting a lot of him. He's going into 1201 right now as the QB 17. This is a guy who, since he's entered the league, is the QB 6 in points per game. QB 6 in points per game. Since he entered the league, behind just Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, Cam Newton. These are career numbers for these guys. He was also the QB 8 in points per game last year, and what was a down year. This was, remember, he had a wrap on his finger for half the year. He had a broken index finger. The whole season was a shit show, and even still was the QB8. And again, since he was drafted, so this accounts for his rookie season, this accounts for his down years, still 6 in points per game in the NFL. And I get the holdup. They get Greg Roman. They get rid of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. Everyone thinks they're going to run the ball into the ground. Well, here's the issue I have with that. You can't build an NFL offense out of Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins and Kamani Vidal. You just can't. And then on top of that, this Chargers defense, Harbaugh's going to come in and help it out, but it's still never been a great unit. They get hurt all the time. Bosa's towards the end of his career. I don't know if they even still have Khalil Mack. Kenneth Murray's been like bad. Like the only guys that are good on that defense have been Bosa, who's been banged up, and then Derwin James. I don't know. I'm not the biggest defensive side of the ball guru in the world, but this is not a world-beating defense to the point where they can just play defense and ground and pound like Harbaugh did with the 49ers. It's just not how that is set up right now. So I just don't know how you build an NFL offense out of Gus Edwards. Now, when we talk about what Justin Herbert has been to this point in his career, he throws the ball a lot. This is a stat from Josh Norris over Underdog Fantasy. Shout out to him. He has the all-time most average pass attempts per game with 39.1. Now, I showed this to say, yes, that's why he's the QB6 in points per game since he's come in, but he's still an amazing quarterback. And you're not going to go from 39.1 pass attempts per game to bottom 5 in the NFL. And that's my biggest holdup. I think a lot of people are expecting bottom 5 and to see kind of what we've seen from Arthur Smith and the Falcons recently, and Arthur Smith when he was with the Titans and like a 49ers type of offense. And I just don't see it. I mean, I will say it could be like the 49ers offense where it's bottom 5 in pass attempts, but top 10 in passing yards and passing efficiency, and it's just that good. But I think it'll be more in the 20s, low 20s. It'll be somewhere around like 20th in pass attempts. And to me, that's enough for Harbaugh or for Herbert to operate and be good. And there's still going to be garbage time where this defense, again, isn't going to be that good, and he has to bail them out of games and they throw the ball late. Now, I do want to show a thread that we've talked about in Dynasty, but I wanted to sort of bring it back around for the redraft crowd here, where this is a great thread from MIBPJ at MIBPJ2 on Twitter. He's a great follow. He has a lot of these really cool charts, but he had a really nice thread just kind of talking about why the Chargers aren't going to be as run heavy, as you think. People are expecting the LAC offense to be run heavy to the point that imbeciles are just suggesting Harbaugh might want to trade away Justin Herbert. Now, again, that was a real storyline in March. And he said last time Harbaugh was in the NFL, he had the 4th most run-heavy offense, and that's been his calling card in college. But wait, right? So you can see here, 49ers, 4th heaviest early down rush percentage from 2011 to 2014. Now, if we look throughout the game, San Francisco in red was actually the middle of the pack, 14th in the first half, but cranked it up to the most run-heavy in the second half compared to other run-heavy teams, right? So that is, again, Seattle, Houston, and my Jets, where they run the ball out the gate, and it's like, oh shit, we're down 20, it's time to let Mark Sanchez throw the ball, or Geno Smith, and that's kind of what the story of that era was with Rex Ryan. I do love Rex Ryan, but 49ers, right, about league average early down rush percentage, and then it gets to halftime, and they crank it all the way up. And that's just because they were 44-19, they won a lot of games, they bled the clock, and that was just their MO, where they would come out of the gates just fine, and then they would decide what they wanted to do. He shows it here. They split out wins in the left, losses in the right, and you can see everyone's cranking up runs late, right? He comes out about league average, and then they crank up the runs, and then the losses, middle of the road, and then as they start losing, they're throwing the ball. Also know how flat it is until halftime, which is the big inflection point. So he's kind of in this mode where until halftime they'd be about league average, and then they'd really either crank it up in each direction, where they'd either throw the ball a ton or they'd run the ball a ton, right? You can see the 49ers, blue is losses, red is wins. You can just see about league average, and then with wins, run the ball a ton, and blue, pass the ball a ton. You can see these other teams, it's not quite as simple as that, where it's like almost overlapping to get there. So this also makes sense when breaking out year by year. In all 4 years, they were pretty much middle of the road in run percentage in the first half. And with that, we conclude today's Roman and Harbaugh history lesson. So you can just see they're a team that runs the ball a ton when they're winning. And because they were 44-19 over that Greg Roman, Harbaugh 49er span, they ran the ball a ton. But when we talk about this Chargers team, they are not the same kind of wagon that we saw with those Harbaugh 49ers, right? They are not the favorite to win their division. They're in a division with the Chiefs. They're in a really tough AFC. This is a team that is probably expected to go about 500, sneak into the playoffs. So this isn't a team that's just going to stomp teams and run the ball in the second half. Again, I would expect them to be in the low 20s, high teens in pass attempts. And if that happens, QB 17 is just absurd. Now, again, Greg Roman likes to run the ball, but he gets like this unneeded hate that he's this bad play caller. he's actually pretty damn good, man. When we look at his offenses in the past, he has, in his 10 years as an offensive coordinator, has had the best scoring offense like of this century in 2019 with Lamar Jackson. He has had just one finish. I don't know why that took so long for me to say. One finish outside of the top 20 in points scored, and only 3 finishes outside of the top 12 in points scored, which is crazy. That means outside of 3 seasons, he's had a top 12 scoring offense every single time, even in 2015 with the Buffalo Bills and 2016 with the Buffalo Bills, which is just bonkers. He scores points whether we like it or not, and I think a sneaky upside here is, again, we could see more pass attempts than we think. The defense isn't as good as we think it's going to be. Greg Roman's actually a really good offensive play caller in terms of offensive efficiency and scoring. And then on top of that, we have this Ryan Heath tweet here that I thought was interesting, where Justin Herbert's pass TD rates by season about 5% in his first 2 years, 3.6%, then 4.4%. Harbaugh's 49ers never were below a 4% team pass TD rate with Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick. Lamar Jackson had a 6.4% TD rate under new Chargers OC Greg Roman. So we can see Justin Herbert's touchdown rate go back to where it was in 2020 and 2021. So we're more efficient on a per attempt basis. We're scoring more touchdowns. We're getting in the end zone. And to me, the cherry on top that no one is talking about that I thought Jacob Gibbs here brought up was a really good point, where Justin Herbert was used more as a rushing weapon in the red zone the last time we saw him with a competent coaching staff. I keep wondering if Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman might use him more as a rusher. So again, this was with Shane Steichen, right? This is the tweet that he quoted. Shane Steichen in 2020 had a designed rush percentage for Justin Herbert of 15.6%. Justin Herbert's rate without Shane Steichen was 7.2%, so actually doubled, where Steichen was using him as a rushing threat. With Greg Roman, I could see that happening. Now, a big part of this point towards Justin Herbert of them going to pass the ball more than we think is because Greg Roman has had Lamar Jackson, Alex Smith, Colin Kaepernick. I want to say those Bills years were probably with Tyrod Taylor. Justin Herbert is none of those guys, but we're going to get the benefit of goal line rushes. So we're going to see more pass attempts because he's more of a pocket passer, but in the red zone, we could see Herbert deployed a lot more as a rushing threat, where I think some people sleep on the athlete Herbert is. Now, of course, rushing is a tendency stat, but with the right coaching staff, he could be used in the red zone, which I think Greg Roman and Harbaugh will use. This is a 6'6" guy who runs a 4.68. If you ran Herbert through RAS as a tight end, he would be more athletic than I'm trying to think of who's not very athletic. He'd be more athletic than I think Cole Kmet's of the world. He's a monster, man. 4.6 40-yard dash at 6'6", 236 pounds, 35-inch vertical, 10-inch broad. That's an athletic guy. Again, he's not someone that's going to do it all the time, but in the right setup, he absolutely could. He had 5 rushing touchdowns in 15 games as a rookie in the NFL, and he also had 8 games as a sophomore at Oregon with 5 rushing touchdowns on that season. I worded that weird. Sophomore season at Oregon, 5 rushing touchdowns in 8 games. He's someone that has, in the past, used his height, used his athleticism in the red zone, and on a team that doesn't have the greatest band of rushers in the world, it wouldn't shock me at all if we saw Herbert used more in the rushing game to offset the lower volume than we were expected to see in the passing game. So to me, QB 17 is just bonkers. Now, the last player we'll talk about here, I didn't mean to go on forever here, but this is our 6th player, Pat Freiermuth. I'm drafting 25% of him. He's the only tight end I'm drafting even over 17% of the time. I'm drafting a lot of him. He goes to the 1203, and to me, he is the last tight end I feel good taking, especially in a redraft managed league. He's probably the last tight end I feel good putting in my starting lineup in week 1, if that makes sense, where after that, you're punting the position. And with Pat Freiermuth, you kind of have to throw last year out. Really shitty year with Kenny Pickett. I think Mason Rudolph started a couple games. He had an undisclosed injury last year in week 1, and then a hamstring strain that kept him out for 5 games. Then he just never really ramped back up. But the talent of Pat Freiermuth throughout his entire career is kind of undeniable. I was shocked by these numbers. Now in 2023, not good at all. This is again PFF receiving grade, first downs per out run, targets per out run, and yards per out run. 2023, not very good. Outside the top 20 in all of them. But if we put his 2021 season and his 2022 season next to the 2023 numbers, it's pretty wild. In his first year as a rookie, that's 2021, he was top 10 in receiving grade. He was top 10 in first downs per out run, 15th in targets per out run, 28th in yards per out run. He then improved on his target earning and his efficiency in year 2 in 2022, where he would have been 7th in PFF grade, 10th in first downs per out run, 8th in targets per out run, and 9th in yards per out run. That is top 10 across the board in just his second season. This is a good football player who now walks into an environment that is going to be really good for him, where we've been sort of quoting Andrew Cooper on this for a while, and shout out to Andrew Cooper. You can, like, his tweets there at Coop A Fiasco on Twitter. He's really good at what he does, and he's the first person that kind of put me onto this thinking with tight ends, but I do love it. We should be prioritizing top 2 target earners for tight ends. When we look at the tight ends that finish top 5 without being a top 2 target on their team, the results are scarce. You have Evan Ingram, who pulled it off. I think that would have been in 2022. You have Robert Tonyan in 2020, and then before that is Martellus Bennett. So that is 3. So top five scoring tight ends since 2014. Only 3 times has a tight end finished top 5 in that span, not being a top 2 target on their team. You need to be a focal point of your offense. And we look at the Steelers' passing attack, and we look at Mike Clay's projections here. Pat Freiermuth has the second most targets, and I don't know. I mean, is Van Jefferson going to out-target him? Is Roman Wilson? Is Jalen Warren? Is Najee Harris? I don't think so. Pat Freiermuth, to me, second best target on this team. He's going to earn targets. He's going to be a focal point of this offense. And Arthur Smith returning to this offense is actually a really good thing for Pat Freiermuth, as much as we don't like Arthur Smith. It is important to remember, Arthur Smith, the head coach, and fantasy usage-wise is bad, but Arthur Smith, the play caller and offensive coordinator, is good. In 2019 and 2020, he finished top 10 in scoring with his offense in Tennessee both years. This is with like Ryan Tannehill and Jonnu Smith, that era. His offense was really, really good. And now he comes to the Steelers, and he's going to take what Matt Canada had as like one of the worst offenses ever and turn it into a much more modern offense. We can see here on the right-hand side from Ryan Heath, you have the Steelers last year in terms of pre-snap motion and play action, going all the way up to the Falcons, which are in the top right of play action and pre-snap motion rates. And why does that matter? You can see here on the left from Jacob Gibbs. Play action passes, good passer rating, better EPA per play, better fantasy points per dropback. Passes with pre-snap motion, better passer rating, better EPA per play, better fantasy points per dropback. It's just across the board. You want motion, you want play action. That's what Arthur Smith does. And then Arthur Smith also loves his inline tight ends, where Kyle Pitts is more of like your wide receiver hybrid. He botched that. He botched Bijan Robinson. But the reason that he loved Jonnu Smith so much in Atlanta was because he's an inline tight end. This is a tweet from John Macri here, where Arthur Smith's offense since 2021, 27.5% tight end target rate, first in the NFL, 23.8% inline tight end target rate, second in the NFL. Inline percentage is how much are you next to the tackle, right? Not split out in the slot or out wide, just next to the tackle, sometimes hand in the dirt, sometimes not, but just inline. That's about as good as I can explain it. And Freiermuth, inline percentage, 67.9% to Kyle Pitts, 29.5%. So he's a much different tight end than Kyle Pitts, which is the type of tight end that Arthur Smith really likes. Arthur Smith is going to make this a much better offense than it's been in the past. And outside of George Pickens, there's no one else competing for targets with Freiermuth, so I am drafting a lot of him. Now, that is 6 of the very, very best picks in fantasy football. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. Helps me out a ton. We're going to be, from here on out, it's just redraft on this channel. We're trying to get back up to 3 videos a week, then 4 videos a week, 5 videos, daily videos in August. We're ramping up here. Live streams every Monday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. I wanted to get this video out on Thursday, but there's been a bit of an issue in the basement. There was some mold. We had like guys working on it. They sprayed some chemicals. I was trying to thug it out. This video was supposed to come out on Thursday. I was trying to thug it out and just be like, I'll just record down here, whatever. I was breathing whatever they sprayed it down here for like 5 minutes. I was like, I have a headache. I just can't do this. So I do appreciate you guys. I'm trying to get back out here, posting, get back into the thick of it, the swing of things. I'm very excited to get into just kind of redraft in general and just kind of attack all of these players from a 2024 perspective. Again, those are 6 players that I think are just like very easy, undervalued players you should be drafting right now. Again, make sure you check out Underdog Fantasy if you haven't already. They already have drafts going. They have the pick'ems where you can go higher or lower on season-long projections, on basketball. They should have stuff for like Olympics. They have a bunch of stuff over there. Baseball, if that's your kind of thing. Promo code RON gets you a deposit match up to $250. You can find that link in the description and the comment section down below. As always, I love you guys and thank you for watching, and I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like like this froze. Ice cold. Oh, oh. Ice around my body like I'm